proud of this show. It's been very successful critically and commercially, and the work is beautiful, and Todd's a great young artist, really finding his way. And I'll turn it over to our friend and esteemed colleague, Peter Frank. Thank you very much.
Thank you, James. I was not simply honored, but excited to be asked to have this discussion with Todd. But I was fascinated to see this series here because of all the issues that are brought up in terms of how do we read this? How do we understand these objects in front of us? Do we understand them as paintings? Do we understand them as pictures? Do we understand them as arguments between the state of painting and the state of picture making? Like everybody else, I walked in here, and at first, particularly from a distance, was not sure I wasn't looking at photography. I got up closer and realized that not only was I not looking at photography, but I was not looking at photographic replication per se. If you want to be replicating the photograph, or you obviously want to reference the condition of photography, but how close do you want to get?
I would say I want to stay as far away as I can be while still looking realistic. Mm-hmm. If that makes sense. I want to portray realism without showing specifically something. I want people to have the perception that there's depth there, that there's a space and light and atmosphere without portraying specific things. I think that's an important thing that I'm trying to do is make the viewer very aware that they're looking at a painting. It has to be fairly crude so that you're certain that it's a simple arrangement of paint. Mm-hmm. And at the same time have just enough there so that it looks like the picture. So people engage more.
These paintings look like photographs, not least because you've painted them in the traditional term is grisaille, and the photographic term is obviously black and white. So that there isn't the issue of replicating a particular quality of color that we associate with photography, which is very hard to do in paint. But it's equally difficult to replicate the conditions of black and white photography, and at the same time, once you do so, even if you don't do so exactly, once you do so, you create a condition of photographic perception.
My background is in neuroscience, and I'm actually interested in sort of perceptual nature of what's going on with art. And I use black and white partly because of, yes, I want to reference black and white photography, and I did a lot of black and white photography before I painted. But I think that when it comes to portraying something, making something that looks like a realistic picture, makes for something that looks like it could be a photograph, color becomes problematic. First of all, color is harder for me to get all the possible colors. There's a more limited number of grays. But also, I think in terms of the brain, we probably rely on the behavior of light when we're determining depth, when we're determining if this is actually a photograph of something. We look at how light interacts with objects, the shadows, the way contrast fades with distance, these things that all show up in a photograph, the rim lights you might see on something. We use that information to determine depth and space. And so those are the sort of things I want to put in my paintings, those light effects, because they tell the brain that there's spaces there. Mm-hmm. And this is probably the part of the brain that's looking at depth, looking for space, is probably mostly ignoring color information. Color changes a lot with time of day. You can have an object you've never seen before, and it could be of strange colors, and you can still know this is how deep it is, how three-dimensional it is. So,
can you know that in a photograph too? I perceive a greater sense of depth and atmosphere in your work.
You see that with photography as well. If you can have the right camera and the right, especially with black and white, it makes those light effects stand out,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's kind of where we get the depth.
Yeah. Also, your subjects are mostly the time of day. It's a diminished light, whatever the atmospheric conditions, whatever the time of day. There is a sense of diminished light, which, in fact, obscures the nature of space here, and also it poses you a problem in terms of visual description, but it also aids you in telling the eye that space exists, and in fact even the supposed specifics of that space.
Yeah, I want them to dissolve. I want you to get close and see splashes of white paint,
Mm-hmm.
crudely done. In fact, when I started painting, I tried to not make it dissolve. I didn't really have much background in painting. I just thought I would paint. It was something to do as a hobby, and I tried to make it look like a photograph from up close,
Mm-hmm.
and that became boring. I like the dissolve effect, the fact that light. From a distance, you have a sense that there's light there,
Mm-hmm.
and when you get close, you see paint.
Did you have in mind the idea of actually fooling the eye into thinking that there was a photograph, or of leaving the question suspended?
I think I hope that people would maybe for a moment see it as a photograph,
Mm-hmm.
but have it resolved, be certain that it's not.
Mm-hmm.
To me, I think it's kind of a part of the experience is the duality of it, and I
Mhm.
think a lot of art is maybe the relationship between the thing portrayed and the way it's portrayed. The aesthetic experience we get is our brain trying to reconcile two different things: the paint and the scene, and our brains are trying to put things together all the
Mhm.
time.
Well, you've complicated the matter by portraying effectively two things at once. You're portraying what is depicted, the landscapes and the details in the landscapes, and the photograph. Are these composite landscapes, or are these very specific places?
They vary. They're generally composite, or maybe disassembled might be a better word. They've taken a lot of things out, recomposed. Some are somewhat specific. Yeah, some are close to the photograph I took.
Mm-hmm.
Others are definitely simplified. I tend to take a lot of things out, sometimes add things.
And why do you take those things out?
To make for a more cohesive scene, and make for a more succinct perceptual experience, where you're kind of seeing a particular pattern or
Mhm.
particular behavior of light. That when you talked before about painting, realistic painting that maybe preceded photorealism, it made me think maybe that's partly what those painters were doing that photorealism couldn't do, is they could emphasize things, leave out the things besides maybe some light effects or some things that give realism that the photograph can't leave out. And so in that sense, you could have maybe more realism with a painting than a copy of a photograph.
Why do you paint small?
There's some practical reasons. I like to start a painting and then finish it before I get tired of it, before I lose track of what I'm trying to say. And it's space, but also small allows me to paint at that level where I can be close and far away. I can step back and fairly easily see the photo and then step close, almost at arm's length by going like this, see how it changes.
Well, and that's what you're pointing out to us, is that one of the basic reasons we come in and think it's a show of photography is that these works are the size of photographs. That were you painting large landscapes, we wouldn't read them as photographs at any point.
Yeah.
But I didn't get the feeling that this was entirely your impetus for scaling them to this size. That was one reason, but not the only. And you're saying that it's also for your touch.
Yeah, it's for the touch, and also just to be succinct. I like to, I think they're generally simple patterns, and I want to kind of be done with it. I want to get the idea across and then move on.
It's interesting you describe them in terms of patterns, because as soon as you mention that word, I look over there at those 3 or 4 paintings of multiple trees and tree trunks, etc., and their identity as patterns begins to come forth. I hadn't thought of these as patterns. I thought of these as pictures, but in fact, these pictures, most of these pictures depend either in certain parts or overall on a concept of pattern.
It's a mix. As a photographer, I tend to go out and look for patterns, or look for looking to simplify basically with the camera to make a scene that the elements come together into the thing that almost be said to be one particular thing you see in the image. So I strive for that with the camera, but it's often hard to do. So in the painting, I have to often make up for what I couldn't do.
That's interesting you say that, because what you're saying is that on one level, one of many levels here, what these paintings do is improve on your photography.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a relatively banal level, but it is a level to consider, because it's. I was going to ask you if these are based on actual photographs that you took, and that sounded like a banal question, or an obvious one. Either it's obvious that you did, or it doesn't matter that you didn't. Did you?
Yeah. To a certain extent, most of them have some photo reference, at least for the light, how bright the scene was at that time, the comparative light levels.
Right. Might any one of these have required or resulted from a number of photographs being taken of the same subject?
Yes.
Yeah.
Quite a few of them, especially the close-up ones.
That means that effectively your photography now serves your painting.
Yeah.
Okay. When did that moment happen? Because you say you began as a photographer, and when did the photography start serving the painting as opposed to standing on its own?
That's a good question. I don't think there was I don't remember a moment of suddenly being aware that I'd made the switch. Because there was certainly a long time, even after I was painting, that I treated them almost as separate arts. And that when I wanted to paint, I'd go through photographs and look at prints that I'd made back in the old days when I did film and had an enlarger in the bathroom. And I guess it just evolved. I can't give you a good answer. It just, the feedback. Eventually, I started to go out in the field and go to photograph something and say, I could paint that, but not what I'm looking at right now. What do I need? What's going to be different? How do I expose differently so it's more easy to paint? Or how am I going to photograph this and then change it later in the studio so that it works as a painting?
Do you ever employ drawing to?
In the beginning, I did a little bit, but no. Generally not now. Very rarely I'll have trouble understanding when I'm trying to get that right pattern effect, how much sky do I want. Then I might do just a couple very simple lines on the board. Say, okay, this is where I'm going to stop the sky.
And I can't imagine you ever paint plein air.
No, I've never, no.
Although it would be very amusing to pose you out in front of one of these subjects with a little canvas mounted on the easel
and
the hat and everything. But on your palette, so all grays and whites, and for your next show. That's the cover. That's the announcement card.
Two big tubes of paint. One black.
Yeah, and two big tubes. Okay, really big tubes, black and white, and a big brush that comes to a very fine point. I think on that note, we should open up the questions to the audience. Yes?
Well, on that note, I wasn't aware of the difference of using a palette knife or straight edge to apply paint versus a brush.
There's maybe 2% is brush work.
Okay.
I do have brushes. They were my grandfather's brushes, but they rarely come out of the box. The point that you made before about the sky being easier without a brush is actually a good point. I'm glad you brought it up. Something like paint, it's fluid, and the gases in the sky are fluid, and if you take a very contrived method with a brush, you can never capture the behavior of the atmosphere. But what I try to do is push the paint back and forth until it starts to look like wind blowing particles across the sky.
What do photographs of your work look like? I mean, I'm talking about full, not thumbnail sketches, which is the only photographs I've seen of your work. But when you take a photograph, a straight ahead reproduction of your work, does it look more like a photograph than the work does itself, or less?
I think it's really hard for me to answer that. It's hard for me to really perceive it without all the concepts in my head about what went into it. I would think it probably looks more like a photograph. Someone who's, James, when you look at my photographs of my paintings, they look more like a photograph than the paintings do. Or a photograph of a photograph is what I guess.
I think they do.
So
that's how
you become less sure that they're paintings?
Yes.
Okay.
These all are diminished light. Do you take those photographs in the diminished light, or do you take it daylight and then clouds?
It's usually diminished light. That's a good point. I'm often out at more sunset than sunrise, but sunset or at night with a tripod. It would make the plein air difficult, actually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that there's a lot of measuring that goes on from choosing the work to choosing the image to rendering it.
Going back to photorealism, I think that there's a certain amount of contemporary photorealism that the painter is looking at more the snapshot, randomness of here's a scene that could have been photographed anywhere. You could have taken your camera just in a random place and taken a photo and put it in a painting, and so you're really referencing snapshots, I guess. And the photographs I reference are very constructed, carefully chosen scenes. The traditional landscape where the photographer goes out day after day waiting for the right clouds or the right light. And of course, because I'm a painter, I don't have to get the right light. I can take it from a different photo I took last year and put it on my subject.
What other artists, painters or photographers or whatever media, do you find yourself drawn to as models for both practice and for concept?
Recently, I've been drawn towards abstract painters, and in particular, abstract painting that starts to look realistic. For example, just one of the shows at Ace Gallery right now, the John Millay, is that the name?
John Millay?
John Millay. His paintings are somewhat abstract, his Maritime series, and yet they look real. You go in that big room, I don't know how many of you have been there, you go in that room and you think you're looking at rigging or construction site or a jungle gym, something you climb up into, yet he clearly has not painted specific sails or ropes or things. He just has streaks and smears of paint that suggest somehow come across as being real. And I'm kind of attracted to that recently. Or even someone like Klein, I think Klein. Franz Klein, the big black and whites that are very, very abstract, and yet sometimes you look at them and you feel like there's depth, that there's a space. I think that work interests me. I'm drawn sort of towards that abstract painting that starts to look real, and I feel like I'm maybe at the other end, real, trying to look abstract.
As a photographer, you also take pictures on black and white, or do you take pictures in color?
I take photos in color now. I work in digital, but I do convert a lot to black and white. So I work in color, but I do a lot of conversions to black and white in the computer. Not always, but often.
So you take black and white and you convert them on the...
No, sorry, I shoot in color, but I convert it in the computer.
On your computer?
On the
You
computer.
just press the black and white thing?
Well, maybe a different method than that, but something like convert to grayscale.
But as a photographer, and when you were performing as a photographer, you were always drawn to black and white, or there was a time that you were in love with color?
I did, when I was just doing photography, I did more black and white. I did some color, but mostly black and white.
Oh, but now you don't.
Now I don't, and I don't think there's a good specific reason for that except practicality. So digital makes photography so easy. In the old days, black and white, I would shoot black and white film, process it myself. It's a lot harder to process and print and color yourself. And I think, I don't know, my photography's evolved into more color, and I'm not exactly sure why that's happened. Yeah, well, definitely I'm interested in light. I think the light effects are interesting, as with black and white photography.
It seemed like there was a conversation about power, you know, man's power versus nature's power, you know, so that's what I got from South Street.
No, you know, I don't think I had any real concept like that. And is comparing, say, these scenes with the headlights or the beach lights versus the sunlight. Other than you brought it up, we can make up things and say, you know, the fact that in paint it's still it can just be white. It can't be any brighter because it's from the sun. It still has to be just the same white as a headlight, which is much dimmer than the sun. Then I haven't thought about it.
Are there any other questions or comments? And we're inviting comments as much as questions because given the fact that Todd has emphasized the circumstances of perception and questions of perception in his work, your perception figures in the reception of this work. Therefore, if you don't have a question but you do have a comment, an observation, we can logically privilege that, or we can go back to drinking, or both.
I was wondering about the black that you use. Is it straight out of the tube, or do you create it yourself? And
Is it
if
tube?
it's straight out of the tube, why straight out of the tube?
As opposed to mixing from colors. It's easy to work with just carbon black. Colors, I mean, they would actually add a different dimension. I would get different grays if I mixed colors.
So you don't even do different blacks like ivory and Mars, like whatever, you just
I have,
carbon black?
and I've actually switched back and forth, but yeah, it's usually carbon or lamp black, which I think are essentially the same. No, I don't switch. And I mean, I'll at different times I'll drift over and start using a different black, but one painting will be 2 tubes of paint, titanium white.
No zinc white.
I've done that as well, but again, I don't really mix it. And I might look into that just to see if I can get some more brightness or different grays. But no, I've used zinc white, but when I used zinc white, I had that zinc white 1 tube. That was it. I think it's a pretty crude method.
And do you have a workup?
What? Do I have a workup? Yes. This is. I'm not afraid of color. It's not that I'm color blind and I can't choose pigments and clothing, so could be.
Now, I decided on solid colors myself today, but I thought maybe we should stand out a little. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
For your questions and your attention.